So today, we're embarking on a deep dive into an unsettling area of forensics and cold cases. We're talking about what happens when architecture itself becomes the crime scene, specifically the body in the chimney.
Right. And these aren't, your typical disappearance cases. These are two very specific, very baffling incidents where individuals just vanished.
Hmm.
And then years later, they're found wedged inside these narrow architectural flues.
And the circumstances are so bizarre, they immediately cast doubt on any easy explanation.
Exactly. I mean, these cases force law enforcement to reconcile the physical facts, the dimensions of a brick shaft, the trauma to a skeleton, with the just sheer psychological strangeness of the situation.
Yeah.
In both of the cases we're looking at, the 1989 Madison, Wisconsin chimney doe and the disappearance of 18-year-old Joshua Maddox in Colorado, the structure itself provided this kind of perverse final resting place that just confounded investigators for decades.
So our mission is to take the conflicting evidence from the sources and really analyze why these cases resist simple closure. We want to understand the forensic conflicts, the clothing enigmas, and the social connections that were, for the most part, dismissed. All these things that force two totally different narratives onto two very similar discoveries. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the discovery that haunted Madison, Wisconsin for 35 years.
So the first case begins on September 3rd, 1989. It's at the Good and Loud Music Store on University Avenue. The building had been vacant, and when the new owners were doing renovations in the basement, they removed an old boiler.
And that's when they found him.
Well, they looked up the chimney flue, and there it was, a
Oh.
human skull.
The physical specifics here are they're so crucial to understanding the horror of this trap. We're talking about a 27-foot vertical drop from the roof,
Right.
straight down into a brick shaft that was only 11.75 inches in diameter.
It's so incredibly narrow. The individual had to have entered from the top and was just wedged at the bottom. The remains were estimated to be a white male, maybe 5'5" to 5'7", and thin. I mean, anyone larger simply could not have fit into that space.
And what came out next is what instantly turned this into a cold case nightmare, regardless of how the person died.
The clothing.
The clothing.
Yeah. The victim, who they estimated was between 18 and 35, was found wearing a sleeveless paisley print dress with a matching belt.
A dress. And under the dress.
Underneath, he had on a long-sleeve button-up shirt and a shaggy pile sweater. He was wearing low-heeled, pointed shoes, and he had a spare pair of socks, but, and this is crucial, he wasn't wearing any underwear.
It's a profile that just fundamentally changes the nature of the entire inquiry. I mean, it's hard to even picture that ensemble, let alone imagine the final terrifying moments of someone in that state falling 27 feet down a pitch-black, narrow hole.
And adding to the mystery were the artifacts found with him: a pocket comb, a German Iron Cross medallion, and a butter knife.
A butter knife? That's odd. It doesn't sound like a professional burglar's tool.
Not at all. Maybe an amateur trying to pry something open, or, maybe it was an improvised weapon he was using for defense. We just don't know.
Okay, and this is where the forensic conflict really comes in, and why this immediately became so suspicious. The autopsy revealed his pelvic bones were severely fractured in 2 places.
Right. And this was determined to be perimortem trauma.
Meaning the injuries happened at or very, very close to the moment of death.
And that designation is key, because it dictates the entire direction of the investigation. If the fall alone caused those fractures, it's a horrific accident, maybe a botched burglary or some kind of, voluntary descent gone wrong.
But the other option.
But if that trauma was inflicted before he went into the chimney, the theory becomes blunt force trauma. Authorities specifically mentioned the possibility of someone, and this is a quote, stomping on the groin.
Wow.
And then the chimney just becomes a disposal site. And given the unusual clothing, the hate crime theory immediately gained traction.
So you're stuck between 2 impossible scenarios. Extreme force from the fall versus extreme force from an attacker. What finally brought any clarity?
Well, it wasn't solving the crime, it was solving the identity. For decades, the case was totally cold. But in 2019, the DNA Doe Project got involved.
Oh, they do amazing work with genetic genealogy.
They do. It was challenging, though, because the victim had been adopted, which creates a dead end in traditional family trees. But they navigated it, and in May of 2024, they identified the man as Ronnie Joe Kirk, originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
So after 35 years, he has his name back. But the manner of death is still a total mystery. It's a frustrating partial victory. Ronnie Joe Kirk is no longer a Doe, but why he was in Madison, why he was dressed that way, and who, if anyone, put him in that chimney, that's all still under investigation. The forensic conflict in the Madison case really highlights how physical evidence can fail to tell the full story. Let's see how a similar tension plays out in Colorado with the chilling story of Joshua Maddox.
Joshua Maddox was 18. By all accounts, a bright, creative kid who loved the outdoors. He went missing on May 8, 2008, from Woodland Park, Colorado. His father, Mike, was naturally very concerned, especially because Josh was still struggling with the suicide of his older brother just 2 years earlier. So he reported him missing 5 days after he disappeared.
And the search just went cold for years. Because he was known as this free spirit who would sometimes go on hiking adventures, his family, I guess, held on to hope that he had simply run off.
They did, but 7 long years later, in 2015, that hope was just crushed. During the demolition of an abandoned cabin located only 2 blocks from the Maddox family home, his mummified remains were discovered crammed inside the chimney.
2 blocks from home.
2 blocks. When the remains were found, the Teller County coroner, Al Bourne, he ruled the death accidental. The theory was that Josh was trying to break in, got stuck, and died of either positional asphyxia or exposure.
But the specific evidence inside that cabin is what makes that ruling so controversial, right?
It really is. Let's break down the contradictions. First, the clothing. Joshua was found in a fetal position, wedged in there tightly, but he was only wearing a ribbed thermal shirt.
That's a shirt.
Just a shirt. The rest of his clothes, his pants, his shoes, his wallet, were found inside the cabin near the fireplace.
Okay, wait. So if he climbed down from the roof, why would he undress first and toss his clothes into the room? It doesn't track.
That detail alone screams foul play to a lot of critics. But the second major contradiction is the obstruction. The cabin owner, a man named Chuck Murphy, confirmed that a large piece of furniture, a heavy dresser or a cabinet, was deliberately positioned in front of the interior fireplace opening.
So even if he had made it down, he couldn't have gotten out.
Exactly. So the argument becomes, well, someone already inside the cabin placed the furniture there. Or maybe Josh was already in the cabin and someone else put him in the chimney and then blocked the exit.
Right. And the coroner's theory had to account for the fact that there was no trauma. No broken bones, no knife wounds.
Yes. And so they leaned heavily on the theory of terminal burrowing.
That's a form of hypothermia-induced delirium, right?
That's right. When someone is freezing, they can exhibit what's called paradoxical undressing, where they feel intensely hot and remove their clothes, and then they instinctively try to burrow into small, dark places, like a closet, or in this case, a chimney, before they die from exposure.
That sounds like a pretty sophisticated forensic explanation for a case where the common sense facts just don't align. A blocked exit, a stripped victim, 2 blocks from his own house. It led to immediate and persistent suspicion of murder, especially when locals pointed police toward a specific person.
Yes. The focus very quickly turned to Andrew Richard Newman, or Andy. He was a former high school acquaintance of Josh's. And this connection wasn't just circumstantial. Online communities, locals, they all insisted Newman was the last person seen with Josh.
And the connection becomes much more sinister after Josh vanished in 2008.
It does. Newman reportedly told a friend that he and Josh were planning a trip to New Mexico. And sure enough, Newman immediately goes to New Mexico and spirals into really serious violence.
In 2009, he was tied to the fatal stabbing of a disabled man, Anthony Schneider. Newman left his own documents at the scene, which led to his arrest. He even confessed later to killing another woman in Taos, claiming he stuffed her body in a barrel, though. That confession was later found to be false.
Right, that other crime had happened earlier, but still. You have a known violent felon linked to the last known sighting of Josh, who was apparently bragging to locals about putting Josh in a hole.
It seems like the most obvious lead. Why did the authorities discount him?
Well, the official reason given by the police and the coroner was that just too much time had passed. 7 years. It meant finding definitive, hard evidence to tie Newman to that cabin at the exact time Josh disappeared was basically impossible. They needed more than just circumstantial rumors and braggadocio. They needed specific, actionable facts.
But the path to justice for Newman, even for the New Mexico murder, was also cut short. The charge for stabbing Anthony Schneider was dropped.
It was. This was partly because the sole eyewitness, Schneider's caretaker, died in an unrelated bar fight before he could testify.
And then Newman himself.
And significantly, Newman was subsequently committed to a mental hospital. He was found to have diminished mental capacity, making him unfit to stand trial. So this legal outcome meant that a major person of interest who had a direct connection to Josh and a known history of violence right after Josh disappeared was essentially removed from the justice system's reach.
This raises an important question. If we connect this to the bigger picture, How often does a seemingly accidental death hinge on investigating an overlooked social connection, especially when the person of interest has mental health issues that really complicate the legal process?
That is the core tension in both of these cases.
Mm.
In Madison, we have the bizarre clothing and the perimortem pelvic trauma that just demands we consider homicide, even if an accidental fall is physically possible. The identification of Ronnie Joe Kirk is a huge victory for forensic science, but it only sets the stage for the true, difficult work of finding out who he was and why he died.
And in the Maddox case, we have the official ruling of accidental death. It rests on a sophisticated but maybe speculative psychological theory like terminal burrowing, and that ruling has to sidestep the unsettling reality of the blocked fireplace and the violent connected suspect who was removed from the justice system right when the case needed fresh eyes. The tragedy of Joshua Maddox remains a profound example of how circumstantial evidence, no matter how compelling, can be overruled when definitive, immediate forensic evidence is lacking. So for you to mull over, if the police in Woodland Park had followed up aggressively on those ticks about Andrew Newman back in 2008, before the body decomposed and before the key witness in New Mexico died, would the evidence found 7 years later in that abandoned cabin still have been ruled an accident? Or would a completely new narrative of foul play have emerged?